The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched endlessly under its crystal dome, filled with representatives from 1,000 worlds. The blue-tinted light from the 3 moons outside cast shifting shadows across the circular chamber. Today's meeting had drawn an unusual number of delegates, all here for one reason: to discuss potential expansion targets for the Council's growing empire. Ambassador Gray sat quietly in his section, watching the proceedings with growing concern. His tall, slender frame remained still while others around him gestured and argued. Unlike the other delegates with their elaborate robes and ceremonial markings, he wore a simple dark suit that almost matched his silvery skin. Council Leader Smith stood at the central podium, his voice booming through the chamber. "We have identified several potential worlds for our next expansion phase. Our analysts have gathered data on resources, defenses, and technological advancement of each target." The massive display behind him lit up with various planetary systems. Gray's heart beat faster when the image of a blue-green planet appeared on screen. "Earth," Smith announced, "a resource-rich world with only one dominant species. Our initial surveys suggest their technology is far behind ours. They haven't even established colonies beyond their moon." Murmurs of interest rippled through the assembly. Gray watched as Ambassador White, known for his aggressive expansion policies, rose from his seat. "This seems like an ideal target. One species, limited space presence, and abundant resources. I propose we begin invasion planning immediately." Several delegates shouted their agreement. Gray could stay silent no longer. He pressed the speaker request button on his console, and the chamber fell quiet as his designation appeared on the main screen. "The chair recognizes Ambassador Gray," Smith announced, though his tone suggested annoyance at the interruption. Gray stood slowly, his height becoming apparent as he towered over the nearby delegates. "Honorable members of the Council, I must speak against this proposal. My species has studied Earth for over 200 years. Invading their world would be—" He paused for effect. Madness. Laughter erupted from several sections of the chamber. Ambassador White's face turned a deeper shade of purple and anger. "Madness. They can barely reach their own moon. Their weapons are primitive. Their cities are vulnerable. What possible threat could they pose to our advanced civilization?" Gray activated his personal projector, and a hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed various scenes from Earth's history: armies clashing across centuries, cities rising from ashes, humans surviving in every environment from desert to Arctic. "Colleagues, what you see as weakness is their greatest strength. Humans are not like us. They don't follow predictable patterns. They don't surrender when defeat is logical. They don't stop when their bodies should break." He switched the projection to show humans building cities, launching rockets, and developing new technologies. In the brief span of 200 years, they went from horse-drawn carriages to spaceflight, from simple rifles to nuclear weapons. Their rate of advancement is unlike anything we've seen in any other species. The chamber had grown quiet now, all eyes fixed on the images. Gray continued, his voice growing more intense. "But most importantly, they are warriors. Not just their soldiers, all of them. They turn everyday tools into weapons. They tell stories about fighting impossible odds. They dream about defeating invaders from space. They have been preparing for us without even knowing we exist." Ambassador White scoffed, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "These are just stories meant to frighten us. Where is your proof?" Gray's expression darkened. "Proof? I have it. My species once fought as you did. We tried a small secret test invasion 50 years ago. I have the records of what happened to that expedition, and if the Council wishes, I can share them. But I warn you, the footage is disturbing." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Council Leader Smith leaned forward, his interest finally genuine. "Ambassador Gray, are you saying your people actually attempted to invade Earth?" "Yes," Gray replied, his voice heavy with remembered horror. "And that is precisely why I'm here today. To warn you. To show you why invading Earth would be the biggest mistake our Council has ever made. The chamber fell into complete silence as Gray prepared to share his evidence. The first part of his warning was delivered. Now came the hard part, making them believe. Ambassador Gray's fingers moved across his control panel, and the chamber's holographic display shifted to show a war-torn landscape. The assembled delegates leaned forward, their multiple eyes widening at the scenes before them. "What you're seeing," Gray explained, "is what humans call World War II. Less than 80 years ago, their entire planet erupted in conflict. Over 60 million of their kind died. By our standards, this should have broken them. Instead, it made them stronger." The images changed to show cities in ruins: London, Berlin, Tokyo. Then the same cities just decades later, rebuilt bigger and more impressive than before. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Observe," Gray continued, "how quickly they rebuild. Where our species might take centuries to recover from such devastation, humans do it in decades, sometimes even years." Ambassador White interrupted, his voice less certain than before. "But surely this shows their weakness. They fight among themselves." Gray nodded slowly. "Yes, they fight among themselves. But watch what happens when they face an outside threat." The display changed to show various historical events. Nations that had been bitter enemies suddenly fighting side by side. Former rivals sharing resources and technology. "They are like a quarreling family," Gray explained. "They may fight amongst themselves, but threaten one of them from the outside." He paused as the display showed countless examples of unlikely alliances throughout human history. They unite every single time. The chamber grew quieter as Gray switched to footage from natural disasters: earthquakes leveling cities, tsunamis washing away coastal towns, volcanoes erupting. Look at how they respond to these disasters. Other species would abandon these regions. Humans, they rebuild. Right there, in the same spot. They adapt and create new technologies to survive. They are, perhaps, the most stubborn species we have ever encountered. Gray's evidence continued, showing humans surviving in the harshest environments on their planet. They live in frozen wastelands, burning deserts, deep in jungles, high in mountains with thin air. They thrive everywhere. Our invasion forces would have nowhere to hide where humans couldn't follow. The display shifted to more recent events. Here's what happened when a meteor struck their planet in a region called Russia. Instead of panic, their first response was to take out their communication devices and record it. They aren't easily frightened. In fact, they're often curious about things that should terrify them. Ambassador White stood again, though his earlier confidence had clearly wavered. But their weapons, they're so primitive compared to ours. Gray's expression turned grim. Are they? The display showed the evolution of human weapons, from spears to nuclear bombs. In just a few thousand years, a blink of an eye by our standards, they went from throwing rocks to splitting atoms. No other species has ever advanced their military technology so rapidly. He zoomed in on more recent innovations: drones, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence. Even now, they're developing new ways to fight. They don't just improve their existing weapons, they constantly invent new ones, and they're remarkably creative about it. The chamber fell silent as Gray prepared his final piece of historical evidence. But perhaps most frightening is this: humans learn from their mistakes. They document everything. They study their failures obsessively. Each time they lose a battle, they come back stronger. Every defeat teaches them. Every setback makes them more determined. The display showed one final image: a timeline of human advancement compared to other known species. The line representing human progress shot upward at an almost vertical angle, while others remained relatively flat. "This," Gray said quietly, "is why invading Earth is madness. We're not just fighting their current capabilities. We're fighting the most rapidly advancing species we've ever encountered. And if we attack them," he let the thought hang in the air, "we'll only make them stronger." The council chamber remained silent as his words sank in, but Gray wasn't finished. he still had much more evidence to present. The council chamber's atmosphere had grown tense as Ambassador Gray moved to his next set of evidence. He adjusted his display to show detailed biological scans of human beings. "Let me show you what makes humans truly dangerous from a scientific perspective," Gray began. "First, look at their basic physical design." The display zoomed in on human musculature and skeletal structure. Humans are what they call persistence predators. In their early history, they would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Most species sprint or ambush. Humans just keep going. They can run for hours. Their bodies are cooling machines, designed for endurance that would kill most other species. The display shifted to show human hands. These appear simple, but they're engineering marvels. Humans can manipulate objects with incredible precision. They can throw projectiles accurately, a rare ability in the galaxy. They can craft tools to extend their natural capabilities. Most importantly, they can use anything as a weapon. Ambassador White scoffed. Though weaker than before, but their bodies are so fragile. No natural armor, no claws, weak muscles compared to our warrior races. Gray nodded. That perceived weakness is exactly what makes them dangerous. Because they're fragile, they've learned to compensate. They don't rely on natural weapons, they build artificial ones. They don't depend on natural armor, they create better armor. Every physical disadvantage has pushed them to develop technological solutions. The hologram displayed human medical procedures. Several delegates turned away, squeamish at the sight of human surgery. "Look at this. They cut open their own bodies to repair themselves. They replace failed organs. They reattach severed limbs. They've even started growing replacement parts. Their bodies might be fragile, but they refuse to accept those limitations." Gray switched to environmental data. Their planet regularly tries to kill them. Extreme temperatures, natural disasters, diseases, but they survive. They build shelters in deserts. They create artificial environments in space. They develop medicines to fight diseases that should wipe them out. The display showed human responses to various toxins and pathogens. Their immune systems are remarkably adaptable. Expose them to a toxin, and survivors become resistant. Many of our standard biological weapons would be useless after first contact. But surely their minds are simple. Someone called from the back of the chamber. Their brains are so small compared to ours. Gray's expression turned grave. Their minds are anything but simple. He showed brain scan comparisons. They use their limited brain matter incredibly efficiently. They can learn almost anything. They can imagine things that don't exist, then make them real. They dream up worst-case scenarios and prepare for them. The display shifted to show human problem-solving tests. Watch how they approach obstacles. When conventional solutions fail, they try unconventional ones. When those fail, they invent new solutions. They call it thinking outside the box, and they're remarkably good at it. Gray paused to let this sink in before delivering his next point. But here's what makes them truly dangerous. They share knowledge. Everything one human learns can be taught to others. They document everything. They build on previous discoveries. Their scientific progress isn't linear, it's exponential. The chamber grew quiet as Gray displayed a final set of data. Human responses to extreme situations. Under pressure, humans become more dangerous, not less. Fear makes them more alert. Danger makes them more creative. Adrenaline lets them ignore pain, lift impossible weights, fight despite severe injuries. They call it fight or flight. But here's the crucial part. When protecting their territory, they usually choose fight. Gray's voice grew softer, but somehow more intense. And remember this, we would be fighting them on their home planet. They've adapted to every environment Earth has. They know every terrain, every climate, every hidden cave and mountain pass. It's not just their world, it's their fortress, and they've been preparing to defend it their entire history. The silence in the chamber was absolute now. But Gray wasn't finished. He still had to show them how human culture made them even more formidable than their physical capability suggested. Ambassador Gray shifted his presentation to display scenes from human entertainment. The images flickered across the chamber's display: movies, books, games, and stories, all showing humanity fighting against alien invaders. This, Gray said, gesturing to the display, is perhaps the most crucial evidence I have to present. For over a century, humans have been imagining how to fight us. They create endless stories about alien invasions, and in most of these stories, they win. The display showed clips from various science fiction movies. Several delegates muttered in disbelief as they watched humans defeating alien forces in countless creative ways. They call this science fiction, but we should call it war games. They've been playing out every possible invasion scenario in their minds. They've considered every weakness we might have. They've imagined countless ways to defeat superior technology. Gray switched to showing human military training exercises. Look how they prepare. They don't just train for current threats, they train for possible future ones. Their militaries have actual plans for alien invasions. They've been preparing to fight us before they even knew we existed. The display changed to show human children playing with toys. It starts early. Their young ones play games about fighting monsters and invaders. They grow up believing they can overcome any threat, no matter how powerful. This isn't just entertainment, it's psychological preparation. Ambassador White interrupted, but surely they would surrender if they saw our superior forces. Gray shook his head slowly. Their culture celebrates underdogs, smaller forces defeating stronger ones. They tell stories of tiny armies defeating vast empires, of single heroes overcoming impossible odds. These aren't just tales to them. They're instruction manuals. The display showed various human resistance movements throughout history. When faced with occupation, humans don't submit. They resist. They form underground movements. They fight with whatever they have. They never stop believing they can win. He switched to scenes of human space programs. Look at how they approach space exploration. Every step is celebrated. Every failure is studied. Every success makes them more confident. They're not just reaching for the stars. They're preparing to defend them. The chamber watched as Gray displayed human responses to various crises. Their culture adapts rapidly to new threats. When they face a problem, they don't just solve it. They innovate. They share solutions. They improve on each other's ideas. Their internet lets them spread information faster than any species we've encountered. Gray's voice grew more intense. But here's what makes their culture truly dangerous. They unite against external threats. Historical enemies become allies. Competing nations share resources. Personal differences are set aside. The more we threaten them, the more united they become. The display showed scenes from human historical museums and memorials. They remember everything. They build monuments to their wars. They teach their children about past conflicts. They honor their fallen warriors. Each generation learns from the sacrifices of the previous ones. He paused to let this sink in before continuing, and they're remarkably optimistic. No matter how bad things get, they believe they can win. They make jokes in crisis. They create art during wars. They find hope in the darkest situations. This psychological resilience makes them nearly impossible to break. The display showed one final set of images. Humans helping each other during disasters, rebuilding after conflicts, celebrating victories together. This is what makes invasion madness, Gray concluded the cultural section. We wouldn't be fighting their militaries alone. We would be fighting their entire culture. Every human, from their youngest to their oldest, would resist. They would see it as their finest hour, their greatest story. And they would make sure their children and their children's children would remember it. The council chamber had grown very quiet now. Several delegates were taking notes frantically. Others sat in stunned silence. But Gray knew he still had to present the military assessment. and that would be even more disturbing for his fellow council members. The council chamber's mood darkened as Ambassador Gray pulled up detailed military analysis files. The holographic display flickered to show Earth's current military capabilities. "Let me be clear," Gray began, his voice grave. "What I'm about to show you is based on their publicly available information. Their actual capabilities are likely far more advanced than what we know." The display showed the global distribution of human military forces. They maintain multiple independent armies, navies, and air forces. If we defeat one military, we still have dozens more to deal with, each with different tactics, different weapons, and different approaches to warfare. He zoomed in on various military installations. Their bases are everywhere: underground, underwater, in mountains, in deserts. Many of their most important facilities are hidden from view. We don't even know where all their weapons are stored. The display shifted to show various human weapons systems. Their nuclear weapons alone should give us pause. They have enough to destroy their own planet several times over. And they keep them ready to launch at a moment's notice. Ambassador White raised an objection. "But our shields can protect against such primitive atomic weapons." Gray nodded patiently. "Yes, our ships can survive a few nuclear strikes. But humans never launch just one missile. They believe in overkill, using far more force than necessary. They would launch hundreds, maybe thousands at once. No shield can hold forever." The display showed human military training exercises. Look at how they train. They practice fighting enemies with superior technology. They develop tactics to take down stronger opponents. Every soldier learns to fight even when cut off from command, even when outnumbered, even when outgunned. Gray switched to showing guerrilla warfare tactics. If we managed to occupy Earth, we would face this: endless insurgency. Humans excel at asymmetric warfare. They plant explosives along travel routes. They set traps. They strike and disappear. They hide among civilian populations. The chamber watched in silence as Gray displayed human special forces operations. These are their elite warriors. They can survive in any environment. They operate in small teams with minimal support. They can disappear into forests, into mountains, into cities, and they train others to fight like them. "But what about their conventional forces?" someone asked. Gray changed the display to show modern military hardware. Their vehicles are designed to be repaired in the field. Their weapons are built to work in any conditions. They have machines for every environment: desert vehicles, Arctic transports, mountain equipment, underwater craft. He highlighted their communication systems. They use multiple redundant networks. If we knock out their satellites, they have radio. If we jam radio, they use hardlines. If we cut their hardlines, they have pre-arranged meeting points and signals. They prepare for every form of communication to fail. The display showed military response times to various crises. Their reaction speed is remarkable. They can mobilize massive forces in hours. They have rapid response teams ready to deploy anywhere in the world. They maintain constant combat air patrols. Gray's expression became even more serious. But here's what makes them truly dangerous. They learn from every conflict. Each war teaches them new tactics. Each battle shows them their weaknesses. They study every defeat obsessively and adapt their strategies. The hologram showed various military innovations throughout human history. They don't just improve their existing weapons. They constantly develop new ones. Electronic warfare, cyber attacks, drone swarms, autonomous weapons. Their military technology advances faster than any species we've studied. And remember, Gray continued, we would be fighting them on their territory. They know every mountain pass, every urban center, every forest trail. They have supply lines, bunkers, and fallback positions already established. We would be fighting an enemy that has prepared their battlefield for centuries. The display showed one final set of images: civilians training with weapons, emergency response drills, civil defense preparations. Even their civilians are prepared for war. Many of them own weapons. They know their local terrain. They have emergency plans for their communities. If we invade, we wouldn't just be fighting their armies. We would be fighting their entire population. Gray let the silence hang heavy in the chamber. He still had to present the economic impact of such an invasion, and those numbers would be even more frightening than the military assessment. Ambassador Gray brought up new data streams, filling the council chamber with economic projections and resource calculations. The numbers scrolled endlessly, each more concerning than the last. Let's discuss the cost of invading Earth. Gray began, highlighting specific figures. First, consider the resources needed just to reach their planet. We would need the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. Earth has multiple defensive layers: air, sea, and land. We would need forces capable of fighting in all three. The display showed logistics calculations. Every day of occupation would require massive resources. We would need to supply millions of troops across an entire planet. Each soldier would need food, ammunition, equipment, and medical supplies. Earth's gravity alone would increase our fuel consumption by 30% compared to standard operations. He shifted to show Earth's industrial capacity. Humans can rebuild factories in weeks. They can convert civilian production to military needs almost overnight. During their Second World War, they transformed their entire industrial base in months. Imagine what they could do now. Ambassador White leaned forward. But surely we could destroy their production capabilities. Gray shook his head. They practice something called dispersed manufacturing. Their production facilities are spread out. They can make weapon parts in thousands of small factories instead of a few large ones. Destroy one facility and production shifts elsewhere. The display showed human resource management during crisis periods. They become remarkably efficient during wartime. They ration resources. They recycle materials. They find substitutes for scarce supplies. The longer we fight them, the better they get at managing their resources. Gray highlighted the cost of maintaining occupation forces. We would need to control every major city, every port, every airport. We would need to guard every road, every bridge, every power plant. The manpower requirements alone would strain our empire's resources. The chamber watched as he displayed capture/loss ratios from his species' previous attempt at invasion. For every 10 vehicles we landed, we lost 7. For every 100 troops deployed, 60 never returned. The resource cost was staggering. And that was just a small-scale test. He switched to showing human salvage operations. They're extremely good at capturing and reverse engineering technology. Every ship we lose becomes their research project. Every piece of our equipment they capture teaches them our weaknesses. They would study everything, adapt it, and use it against us. The display showed economic impact projections. The longer the invasion takes, the more it costs us. Humans practice scorched earth tactics. They destroy resources rather than let enemies capture them. They sabotage infrastructure. They poison wells. They burn supplies. Gray pulled up historical data from human conflicts. During occupations, they target supply lines. They destroy cargo ships. They ambush supply convoys. They plant explosives on transport routes. The cost of protecting our supply lines alone would be enormous. The chamber grew restless as he showed the projected casualty figures. Each lost soldier means lost equipment. Each destroyed vehicle needs replacement. Each damaged ship requires repairs. The cost increases exponentially as the conflict continues. He displayed images of human adaptation to captured technology. They don't just copy technology, they improve it. Give them a sample of advanced technology, and they'll find ways to make it better, cheaper, and more efficient. Our own weapons could end up being mass-produced in their factories. The economic projections turned red as Gray continued. Even if we succeeded in conquering Earth, holding it would drain our resources for centuries. We would need constant military presence, continuous supply lines, endless replacement of losses. The cost would grow every year. Finally, Gray showed the impact on the Council's other operations. An invasion of Earth would require redirecting resources from dozens of other projects. Our expansion in other sectors would halt. Our current territories would see reduced protection. Our entire economy would need to shift to a war footing. He let the numbers speak for themselves as they floated in the chamber's air. The total projected cost made several delegates visibly uncomfortable. And remember, Gray concluded the economic section. These projections assume everything goes according to plan. If humans prove more resilient than expected, if they adapt faster than predicted, if they unite more quickly than anticipated, the actual costs could be far higher. The council chamber had grown very quiet, but Gray knew his final warning. The most important part was still to come. Ambassador Gray stood silently for a moment, gathering his thoughts. The council chamber waited in tense anticipation. What he was about to reveal would change everything. Honored council members, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. I must now share why my species is so certain about this warning. 50 years ago, we made a terrible mistake. We thought, like you do now, that Earth would be an easy target. The display showed classified footage, never before seen outside his species' highest military command. We launched what we called a preliminary infiltration. 3 ships, 200 of our best troops. The mission was simple: establish a hidden base, test human defenses, gather intelligence. The chamber watched in stunned silence as Gray played the mission recordings. The first week went as planned. We established a base in a remote mountain range. Our cloaking technology kept us hidden. We began our surveys. He paused, his hands trembling slightly as he advanced to the next footage. Then everything went wrong. A human child wandered near our base. Instead of following protocol and staying hidden, our commander made a decision to capture and study the human. That single decision doomed the mission. The display showed the aftermath. The humans noticed the child's disappearance. They organized search parties. They calmed the mountains. Their determination was unprecedented. They didn't stop searching, even in terrible weather, even at night. Gray's voice grew quieter. When they found our base, we expected terror. Instead, they responded with unexpected courage. Local military forces were on site within hours. They breached our defenses using surprisingly effective tactics. Our technology advantage meant nothing in the close-quarter fighting that followed. The footage showed scenes that made several delegates turn away. We lost half our force in the first engagement. The humans captured one of our ships. The survivors retreated higher into the mountains. But the humans... Gray paused, collecting himself. The humans just kept coming. He switched to satellite imagery. Within days, the area was swarming with their forces. They established a perimeter. They brought in specialized equipment. They monitored every frequency we might use for communication. Our survivors were trapped. The chamber was absolutely silent now as Gray continued. The remaining troops tried to fight their way out. The humans had anticipated this. They had set traps along every possible escape route. They used our own technology against us. The few who managed to break through their lines were hunted down one by one. Gray stopped the footage. Out of 200 troops, only 3 survived to reach the evacuation ship. The humans captured most of our equipment. They took prisoners. They learned things about us we never intended to reveal. He brought up current Earth surveillance data. Today, they have research facilities dedicated to studying that incident. They've developed new weapons based on our technology. They've created defense systems specifically designed to detect our stealth systems. They're more prepared now than ever. The display showed Earth's increased military readiness. The humans call that event First Contact. They don't know who we were or if we'll return, but they're ready if we do. They've built detection systems worldwide. They've created rapid response forces. They've developed protocols for alien threats. Gray faced the council directly. That failed mission taught us something crucial. Humans are most dangerous when they're fighting on their home ground, protecting their own. If we launch a full invasion, we won't be fighting just their armies. We'll be fighting every human on the planet. He cleared his display, leaving the chamber in dim light. I stand before you today, not just as an ambassador, but as a survivor of humanity's defensive capabilities. If we invade Earth, we will face a species that has already defeated us once, a species that has spent 50 years preparing for our return, a species that now knows we exist. Gray's voice carried his final warning. The invasion force we lost was just a tiny fraction of our military might, but it taught us an undeniable truth. Earth is not to be conquered. The humans are not to be underestimated. If we ignore this warning, if we proceed with an invasion. He paused, looking at each council member in turn. We will be starting a war we cannot win. The council chamber remained silent as Gray's words echoed through the vast space. The decision they would make next would determine the fate of both their civilizations.